If you're a Pittsburgh baseball fan, then this is the podcast for you. Make your way down, grab a beverage, and get ready to talk Pirates with myself, Craig Toth, and Scott Jackson, two of the biggest fans you'll ever meet. This is Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
In less than 24 hours, I will be landing in Tampa, Florida, making my way down to spring training, checking my suitcase to see if Scott has packed himself away in it. I wish I could bring him. He will be coming next year, when we're still doing this. This one is a family trip. Going to take in a decent amount of games, but also going to do some family fun stuff as well. We've been seeing some spring training games, not as many as we would like, not all broadcasted, but we're going to talk about it. Scott, how you doing today, brother?
I'm getting by. Make sure you check for stowaways. I may want to escape the cold, the rain, and the sickness that keeps going around and around where I work and live. But I'm excited for you, and yes, someday I will get down there to enjoy spring training.
Yeah, this one's going to be a little bit different for me. I've done a couple, I would say, boys trips, kind of solo trips this last two times, and came and went as I pleased. That's not going to be the case this time. Luckily, my kids, my nephews are kind of into baseball, so they're going to be willing to tag along to a degree, but I do know there's going to be some maybe some family beach time and some pool time mixed in there as well, which, like you're talking about this weather, I'm not going to shy away from. But we have started to see the Pirates on TV recently for at least a few games. But even when they're not on TV, we're getting videos from other people. There's a lot more stats than there used to be. And that's one thing that kind of stuck out to me. I'm an old guy. Didn't really see spring training games when I was growing up. Not even sure if any of them were broadcast at that point in time. To, even a few years ago where you would get the game, you may get some, miles per hour. How fast is the guy throwing? Some places didn't even really put that up on the board. Now you have the StatCast metrics out there. You have the ABS system in there, so you're seeing where the pitches are landing. There is just an information overload. But to get started with this, I mean, for me, it's the hot starts, the stuff that we kind of warned everybody about, and seeing different stuff happening. There's some stuff that can be taken from that, from guys that are getting out of the gate, hitting the ball hard, or hitting a lot of home runs, or driving in a decent amount of runs. Obviously, these games don't count for anything, but there is some stuff that could be taken from this. I had a few guys jotted down. DJ Stewart, hitting the ball pretty well, but also getting on base a lot. There's good numbers for him in the smallest of sample sizes. Obviously, Matt Gorski, former minor league Willie Stargell, basically hitter, slugger of the year from a couple years back. And our old pal Jack Sawinski are guys that are really sticking out as far as driving in runs, hitting some home runs. But that is not all it's cooked up to be in some of those instances.
Well, yeah, when you think of spring training and you think of things that Lee Com and the way the wind blows, that's where you really do need to sometimes dig in deeper. You need to look not just at your traditional stats of batting average and home runs, because the home runs are going to show up. I mean, we get fooled every year by somebody, right? Henry Davis, the one year we thought, oh yeah, he's locked in. He's going to have a great year, and then it just didn't. It just didn't materialize. And so, we need to be cautious and not just look at the number of home runs, but look deeper into those advanced metrics that you were mentioning to look and see how are they not just are they hitting the ball over the fence, but how are they hitting the ball? They a guy can tattoo a ball and it can get caught in the wind and blown back, or you can get a home run like Jack Sawinski had the other day that really in Pittsburgh would have been, a lazy pop up, but because it got some wind under it, it carried out. Now, him making contact is great and it's part of the process, and there's no shade thrown at that, but it's not just as simple as reading the box score and having an idea of what's going on in the games. You need to dig a little bit deeper and get your eyes on some of these, which is great because with those games being covered more and probably not as many as should be on TV, given the technology that we have currently, but it is better than it used to be. It used to be that they just put one or two spring training games on just to try to sell tickets for the early part of the season because the whole thing would be a commercial just for tickets, tickets, and this is what's going on. These are the promotions. These are the giveaway. Oh, by the way, yeah, okay, this guy's up the bat, but get your tickets 1-800-BUY-BUCKS, right? We heard that a million times, but yeah, I think as technology progresses and we can get a deeper understanding of what's going on, it sets more realistic expectations going into the season.
Yeah, because even the first game, DJ Stewart had a double and then a home run, and the way that the Orioles broadcast was covering it was that those were both just kind of lazy fly balls. We've seen, little bumblings in the outfield where, and obviously they're going to be more, you know, friendly with what's an air and what's not an air for different types of things. And then, Matt Gorski, it was something that I was talking to you about before this is that, and I'll give him credit for this, is that Josh from the Bridge to October podcast, I don't know if it was this past spring training or the spring training before, Josh can probably correct me on this, basically found a site or a stat where you could find out the level of competition that the player was performing against, whether it was, single A, double A, triple A, or a guy who was like a major league pitcher. Not that some of those stats, matter as much. I believe that Henry Davis tattooed a ball off of Corbin Burns last year during spring training, but at least gives you an idea. Because with Gorski, I did a little bit of, kind of digging into that. Just because he's one of those guys that's kind of like called like the reserves, hasn't been a starter in any of those games that he's had the home runs in. And the one guy finished his, professional career in double A last year, and that's the highest he's ever been. The other guy was a triple A pitcher last year, and the third guy was a guy who had made it to the majors, but had not been in the majors and made his way back up since 2022. So take that for what it's worth. And this is not like downplaying, what Matt Gorski has done, the work that he's put in. He's a guy I was excited about back in 2022. He has put up really good numbers in Greensboro. You want to see how those translate for anybody that follows the Pirates minor leagues, how that is going to translate into Altoona. Go down to Greensboro, watch a game. It's a bandbox, especially for a right-handed hitter. A lazy fly ball to left field turns into a home run more times than not. Gorski got injured, was out with like a quad injury for, the majority of his time in Altoona, came back, did perform well there. But for Gorski, the biggest thing for him has been striking out almost 30% of the time, walking less than 10% of the time. And that has been a pattern for him throughout the minor leagues. A very athletic guy who can play all three outfield positions, has played some first base. And so people kind of want to find some excitement in that. For the Pirates, would it be great if a 27-year-old finally, decided this was the time he was going to break out. I mean, that happens for other teams at times. It doesn't seem like it happens as much for the Pirates, but you honestly have to look at that stuff. And you mentioned Sawicki's home run, and we kind of like messaged back and forth that like, yeah, that was just kind of like a pop up that got carried. But then Sawicki today in his hits, the one thing I looked at was he was the top exit velocity in all three of his hits. They were all over 105 miles per hour, hitting the ball hard. So that's something I can look at as well. And maybe with Sawicki, this is something that's kind of just popping in my head because that's the way I think. I think a lot of Sawicki stuff was between the ears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so if you get that one hit that maybe puts you over the edge mentally, that then all of a sudden you start seeing the ball better, like maybe I'll put that out into the world, that maybe Sawicki kind of figures that out, because I feel like he just kind of got disgusted last year and was trying too many different approaches, got in his own head, and just kind of fell off a cliff.
Yeah, and we'll see what kind of impact a new hitting coach has with that, and if maybe they tweak the organizational outlook to allow Matt Haig to spend more time on the guys that are, you know, either on the major league roster or on the brink, and which we've discussed, several weeks back, of instead of putting him in charge of the entire system's hitting development, maybe just let him focus on the guys that are here now. And if Jack can get a little more time, that's good. I'm all for it. I'm high on Jack. I'm a big Jack Sawicki fan. I really want him to come through. I really want him to maximize all of that potential that he has. And yeah, you're right. If just getting hot at the right time for the right amount of time can build that confidence, uh, just they're human beings. They're not video game characters, and so there's a psychology that goes into it. There's human nature that feeds into this production, and hopefully that, because if he can be that Jack that we were thinking he was going to be last year, makes it a completely different team.
Yeah, and for Jack, I mean, he was in 2023, as far as like B war goes, he was over a 2 war player, which makes him a regular contributor. I mean, could he take that step forward? I believe there is a higher ceiling in there to a degree. He's always going to kind of have his warts.
Hmm.
He's not the greatest defensive player, but he's a gritty defensive player. Um, early on in the spring training, he kind of maybe misplayed a ball a little bit, but then threw a guy out of second because he has that,
Yeah.
wherewithal as to where the ball goes. So he is a guy who is a student of the game, I believe, and I think he's a very gritty player, gets in his own head. But even if he is that 2 war player or 2.5 war player and is that contributor, that means so much more than the guy who was well below the -war player that he was last year. And that, if he wasn't that last year, we've talked about this before, that kind of turns this season around a lot. Another guy that pops into my head that direction is Henry Davis. I mean, Henry Davis, I don't say he carries the weight of this franchise on his shoulders, but he was kind of like that first player that really has that on him. I mean, Nick Gonzalez, it happened during, that COVID season. He was a fairly high draft pick for the players, but I don't think that, once you have that 1-1, whether you think he was the right pick, whether you thought he was the safe pick, or whether it may be, we've talked about this round and round, he was one of 4 guys that was being mentioned in that. So it wasn't like them picking him at 1-1 was, out of left field, by any stretch of the imagination. So he's kind of carrying that with him. He's also carrying the fact that, I mean, he wasn't that great of a catcher. So he's having to also work towards being a major league hitter, but also working towards being a major league catcher. Last year, I saw more of that catcher in him, which is a good thing to see. But in the end, a guy like Henry Davis, he's never going to be that. I mean, God, I hate to even mention this name, but like an Austin Hedges who can bounce around from team to team, a Maldonado who can bounce around from team to team and just basically find a spot because he has such a defensive, I guess, like positivity to him that, you'll put that aside. He kind of has to hit. And in this spring training, there's been, I mean, I think he looks more relaxed, but I just don't see it the way that some other people are seeing it.
Yeah, I think that his lasting legacy is going to be the 1-1 pick that allowed us to get Bubba Chandler. I think Bubba's going to come on so strong that it's going to make sense that way. But yeah, I think that, well, you're right. Last year he was more of a catcher, and the hitting completely dropped off. He couldn't hit the broadside of the barn last year and was trying to pull everything. And so, as we see a little more encouragement of him having a better approach of trying to use the entire field, he is a major key to this and a major point of judgment for Charrington and how Charrington is doing for this rebuild is what does Henry Davis bring? And at what point do you decide you're going to put him in a position to succeed versus fail and take some of that mental stress off of him and move him away from catcher? You decide that Joey Bart is your catcher one, and then maybe Endy's going to be your catcher two because Charrington said that Endy's not going to play another position. He's a catcher. And so he didn't say that about Henry. So what are we going to do there to maybe allow him to get more time in the cage and not have to spend so much time game planning? I think that eventually, not that he doesn't have the mental capacity to do it, it's just putting him in a position where he can grow that aspect because he may end up being a Joey Bart, interestingly enough. Somebody who stumbles early and then grows into it later and eventually breaks out. But that's why they have these mental health coaches and the psychological aspect of it. But you need to have a long hard look and see what can we do to put him in the best position to get him to maximize that potential as quickly as possible.
Yeah, because with Endy, I mean, he has shown the ability to play, multiple positions, in the minor leagues, and I believe he could be successful at those. I mean, obviously Henry has been a catcher his entire life and was put in right field. You know, you can say whether it was good, whether it was bad, but he was being brought up here for his bat. The catching at that point in time had not come along to the point that it was last year. So you were hoping that his, what he had been doing in the minor leagues, but Henry has shown he could hit in the minor leagues. So that's like the weird part to me is that I mean, I know that there is that jump from AAA to the major leagues, but a guy that can just absolutely demolish the ball. I mean, I'm a guy, everybody knows I look at the minor leagues and I look down at AAA and I start looking at the guys that their OPSs are like over 800 and Henry's at the top of that. Like, so that's kind of a weird thing to me. I mean, like you said, they'll mention, Andy, at least for this year, because of, coming back from Tommy John and getting acclimated, he came into the professional ranks as a catcher. Catcher is his natural position, showed he could do it at the major leagues. As far as the catching aspect of it, a lot of people saw, him come up through the minor league ranks and absolutely rake. And yes, he did rake in AAA in his small sample size the first time he was there. But once he actually got settled into AAA, like Andy's bat was the one that was kind of a little bit further behind. And I'm not saying he's going to fall back into being, that defense only catcher, but you have a catcher in Henry Davis whose bat is performing better there. You have Andy, Rodriguez, whose glove is performing better in both places. I mean, for me, like, I think that at some point in time, you're going to have to make that decision. And I was kind of along the train, and, kudos to Henry Davis for working on it as hard as he did. I was along the train of, before last offseason, like, focus on right field. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know if catcher's for you, and your bat is what matters so much more. But then also, if you have a catcher that can hit, I mean, that obviously falls more into Charrington's plan of kind of trying to find places where, players can perform and, kind of outperform their position with at least one aspect of their game. Mostly on catcher, it's been on defense. But if you have a hitting catcher, especially with the way things are going to a degree with the, automated balls and strikes, possibly at least getting the challenge system in, not this year, but maybe next year, and then moving towards whatever, is something I've talked about previously. But for any of these guys, the bat has to play. For this team to be successful, the bat has to play.
And what do you do with Henry now? Because once you move Reynolds to right field, I think that takes an option out completely for Henry because I don't want him playing left field. Part of my
No,
thought process was put him in right field because you're going to play half your games at PNC Park, and that's got to be the easiest right field in Major League Baseball. You just have to take the time every afternoon to play balls off that chain link fence and learn those bounces and how the ball is going to react based on that. But the rest of it would be a a pretty easy um, progression to figure it all out as far as learning a major league baseball position would be. But throwing him in left field is not an option now.
no.
So you kind of shot yourself in the foot there. But the thought process is very similar for moving Reynolds to right as it was to put Henry in right. But at least Reynolds is a proven major league outfielder. It's just kind of taking some of that space, shrinking that space that he has to cover down.
Yeah, and one thing I did want to mention, because I mean, we'll stop recording and I'll be like, oh God, it was in my head at the beginning, and I kind of forgot to mention it. Was we were talking about those Statcast numbers and different stuff, and with Henry Davis, he has two doubles in this. And if somebody was just looking at, the box score, didn't watch the games, obviously one of them was not broadcast, the other one was, you could see his double was one that he kind of pulled and got it in, in between the third baseman and the left fielder and hustled it out, because that's something Henry's always going to do. That man has no lack of hustle whatsoever.
Right.
The other one that he hit, there was a video out there. Jim Rosati at, what is he, North Shore Notch, I believe.
North side notch.
Is he North? I know that. No, he's North Side Notch, and they're North Shore 9. That always confuses me. So, but yeah, Jim Rosati, just, everybody, if you're watching this or, listening to this or whatever it may be, you probably know Jim Rosati. He put a video out there. And the one thing I noticed about the first thing about the hit, that then I wanted to go look to see if there was Statcast data on there, is that Henry didn't move very quick out of the box. Because, as a baseball player, kind of when you have a hit. Like when something is going fair or foul. And to me, it kind of looked to Henry that it's like, oh man, I didn't hit this that great. So like then all of a sudden he saw that it was going to drop, and then like halfway to first base, he kind of picked it up and got into second base. So I went to, the Statcast data, something that not every fan is going to do. We're the psychopaths of, the Pirates fandom. We go and we kind of do that stuff. The regular fan is not going to do that. So I basically went and looked and I said, okay, so how hard did he hit this ball? Okay, he hit it a little over 90 miles per hour. So it's a little bit of a hard hit ball. Most of the balls that, Henry hits are going to be fairly hard. But, once you get up over that 100 mile per hour, that's really the threshold where you start to see more hits fall in, more solid contact. So, okay, it wasn't hit that bad. The launch angle was out of this world. I mean, it was like 35 to 40 degrees. So it was like up high. And then you look at that expected batting average. It was 0.070, which basically means that most of the time in a major league game, or even in this game, the player should have been able to make a play on it. So, I mean, take it for what it's worth in that aspect. And this is not like poo-pooing Henry Davis's ability to perform, because we've always talked about, like, we're talking, okay, guys are really performing in spring training. Don't pay attention to that. Guys aren't performing in spring training. Don't pay attention to that. But for me, I'm not going to, make it look like, okay, Henry Davis is performing well when I'm not sure what to expect of him yet. Like, I'm not going to look into him having two doubles and say, okay, he's kind of figured it out. I'm not going to look at Matt Gorski, he has 3 home runs. He can be an answer. DJ Stewart, a guy who, has been up and down throughout, the minors and majors for the past 6 years and has been good in spurts. I mean, I think it was 2 years ago, and I don't know if he was the Mets at that point in time. He had like an 840 OPS in, limited action. But then last year, he kind of got a run in the beginning, and then all of a sudden, I mean, I think he hit a home run against us. I think that's why everybody kind of maybe remembers him. But, his OPS was down below 700, maybe even below 600. So, like, that's the type of stuff. I mean, there's just so much information. And that's why I titled this Pirates Information Overload, is because, I mean, back in the day, we had no information. Then for a little while, we had, the eye test and kind of what was going on. You can't trust these minor league stats. And now we have StatCast data. We have all this kind of stuff that can make you really kind of lose your mind as to looking into it. For me, like, for Henry Davis, it's the same as Jack Sawinski. Is he good good between the ears? Does he not feel too much pressure on him? Is he feeling relaxed? The other stuff may come. It may come, towards the end of spring training. I would rather have that happen, him hitting well at the end of spring training, than a guy that's like tearing the cover off the ball in the beginning of spring training and then falls into a lull at the end when you're actually, facing pitchers who have worked through some of their stuff, like Mitch Keller, trying his changeup more, like Jared Jones introducing his sinker. I would rather have him hitting better at the end, work out the kinks now. So, I mean, I guess basically what I'm saying, Scott, is I don't know what all this means.
Yeah, process over production, I would say. With some of these pitchers, especially like you're saying, it just, hey, if Mitch Keller wants to go out there and every pitch throw a fastball and just throw it in different quadrants, every time, and then just do that for an entire start, that's perfectly fine. Well, Stephen Brault kind of made it perfectly fine in a major league game too, but yeah. So if these guys are working on things, and that's a little different for pitchers than it is for batters, I understand that. But if, like Key Brian Hayes, if it's all about like a couple of games, just making sure that the two-handed swing feels good and that's the right muscle memory to do that, then that's just part of it. And you can't look too deep into some of those results and lack of production because of that, because that might be what it's all about. Maybe Henry says, wherever the ball's pitched, when I go into this game, I'm gonna get a hit to right field. That could be something that they do. That they just go up there and he lets good pitches that he could pull go by, just focusing on hitting it the other way. Those are the kind of things that could conceivably happen in spring training and spring training games. And fans that don't know that because we're not in the dugout might say, "Oh, well, yeah, okay, Henry went hitless," but he was working on something. And so that's spring training. That's what makes spring training a different animal completely. Is that you just don't know what they're working on, and you don't know what their goal is for that game. And so the best that we can do is just look as deep as we can and try to make sense of it, even if we're not playing with all the information.
And I will say, I do like that Mitch is working on a changeup, just because I do think he needs that other pitch. Obviously, the cutter, doesn't work as well. I mean, you can look at the numbers. I mean, his cutter gets blasted all over the place. And I just think he needs that pitch that's going to take a little bit of like that work off of his arm a little bit, because I mean, no matter what you think of Mitch Keller, and I know that there are people that think, he's a guy that pitches strong in the beginning of the season and then falls off at the end. Yeah, he did that last year. The year before, he actually fell into his funk, I think, right in July and started to work himself out of it in 2023 as the season ended. Because if you look at his numbers, I mean, he actually got himself back into being a starting pitcher. I think his whip went right back below 1.3. And why do you think we won all of those games, towards the end of the season and had that winning streak going? But in essence, I mean, Mitch and Skeens are those two guys that you have, as we've mentioned before, to kind of carry those innings. So if you can get him to throw another pitch to hopefully be more effective, but also get him back up towards his goal of throwing 200 innings. I mean, that's important to this team as well. And we've had, over the past week or so, I mean, when Caleb Ferguson was signed, they said they were going to stretch him out. And now we have, the Carmen Majinski name thrown into the hat as a guy who kind of wants to start. So I mean, that's the goal of most of these pitchers when they are young, when they're in the minors, and kind of get pushed to the bullpen. Aroldis Chapman's actually an anomaly. He's a unicorn. He's a guy that came out when he's a little bit older and was always a reliever from the time he was in the minors. There's not too many guys that, okay, we draft you and we put you straight to the bullpen. Like, a lot of these guys get chances to start. Carmen Majinski was drafted in the comp round pick, so he was seen in that draft actually as a steal for the Pirates because he was a guy that was projected to go within the first round. They got him in a comp round just outside of that, was a starter in SEC school, didn't perform terribly, within the minor leagues. The last time, was in Altoona a couple years ago, and it didn't go great for him, but it wasn't like a guy that you would say, okay, we're just going to kind of give up on this. I mean, he's kind of trying to fight his way back to this. I mean, there's probably some reasons for this, but the Pirates also let him do it. So, I mean, I liked him in the bullpen. I had an idea of him in the bullpen, but I'm not opposed to seeing him in different roles either.
Yeah, well, I guess you think of the psychology of it as these guys grow up, they're always starting pitchers, probably starting pitchers and shortstops. And that's something that, as time goes on and they move higher up, they continue to do that. And like you said, as they get drafted, and I'm sure that it's just as much a mindset. And I've been a starter, and that's what I want to be. That's where I feel comfortable. But it's also most likely a business decision when you see the kind of free agent contracts that relievers sign versus the kind of free agent contracts that starters sign. And I'm sure that that plays into it. It is a business. They are human. I think that he's, elite back of the bullpen, high level potential, so I'm nervous about pulling him out of that, especially since he hasn't been stretched out. But my eyes tell me that I get a little nervous when he gets into that second inning of work. But hopefully, by stretching things out, maybe that makes it a little bit better. We get a little more comfortable with that. Um, but I ultimately would like him to be in the back of the bullpen. I see him as like an eighth inning guy on this team. I don't think Holderman is quite ready to take that eighth inning job. He hasn't shown that he is, but Majinski has shown that he has what it takes to do that. But hey, as long as he's expressing it in the proper way, and that's what I think it was Charrington said that it's always been very respectful and very professional, and using the forums that are given to him to do so and let his intentions be known. Hey, more power to him.
Yeah, and you always need a long relief guy. I mean, we saw Luis Ortiz fill that role last year and fill it very well, and then work himself back into a starter. Obviously, the previous season he was a starter, so he was a little bit more stretched out, had a little bit more innings, under his belt. But for Majinski, I mean, he's kind of seeing that, Luis, started out in that way and then was able to work himself into a starter's role. So, with him gone, and like I said to you before, I mean, even before he was gone, there's going to need to be somebody to fill that role. So maybe it's his way of working him back into that. I mean, right now, I mean, if you're looking, I mean, everybody I think is kind of looking to fill that Ortiz role because he
Hmm.
performed it so well last year.
Yeah.
I mean, and the candidates right now are Johan Oviedo, who I'm at this point in time, I was looking for, the medical reports that usually come out on Wednesday and didn't see, really anything. Don't know if he's cleared to face live hitting yet. You have Mike Burrows, who we talked about, last week, who had about, I think, like 51 innings. Uh, and Ortiz was a starter, so he was kind of stretched out and made his way back into the starter's role and went up over like a threshold that I see for some of these players up over that 120 inning mark. I don't see that for Mike Burrows. You have Braxton Ashcraft, who's being mentioned, who we mentioned as well, who didn't pitch more than two starts, two appearances in my mind over the last few months of the season, who got up to around 70 some innings. And, Oviedo, who's coming back from Tommy John surgery, who they've said, as much as the Pirates beat reporters, everybody is beating the drum that they are going to slow play this with him. Like, I don't know. Like, here's the thing is, we talk about how, like, people say, like, don't watch what they say, watch what they do. The crazy thing is that Charrington and Shelton, they don't try to misdirect anybody. Like, they say certain things maybe off the cuff a little bit. Like, they'll say, okay, we're looking to compete. I believe that when they made the additions last offseason, that they thought with the pitching that was coming up, that they would be able to compete. And they did for half of a season. I think that they believe in these players at this point in time, that with the pitching they still have in place, that they'll be bounce back candidates, that they will be able to compete. So for me, like, I don't know. Like, it's just very weird for me if they say, okay, we're gonna slow play this, and everybody's just like, nah. Like, he'll be started. Like, I don't know. Like, until I see it play out and everything they've said so far, they said they would add players. They said there was positions of need. They said they were trying for trades. I mean, even Ben Cherington came out and said, we've been trying for Andrew Heaney, the last two times he was a free agent, and now we finally got him. Like, they're fairly honest with their answers. You may not like their answers.
Hmm.
They may not be the answers that kind of come to fruition at, points and times, but competing to me is kind of relevant. They mentioned the Arizona Diamondbacks the year before, and it kind of seemed like their goal was around 84 wins. They got to 76 wins and had keep Brian Hayes basically in a wheelchair for the majority of the season. Jack Sawinski have a regression that many of us have never seen. David Bednar, their all-star closer, below 7 saves when he hadn't blown more than 3, each year the previous 2 years. I mean, to me, like, 84 wins last year was fairly attainable. Yes, it didn't happen, but I just don't see, like, I mean, like I said, people call me a bootlicker. I know they will. But, like, that's the thing to me is, like, you're looking for something at this point in time. If you're trying to say, like, oh yeah, they're saying stuff that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just if they convert those saves of Bednar's, where that puts them that that close to that goal of those 84 wins. So yeah, that's something that I think that there's a lot of negative sentiment out there among Pirates fans But really, that is, and I've said it a million times, that's the product of how they ended last season. Really, they competed deep into the year after the trade deadline. They had the bones of a team that really could make something happen, and they've got pitching that's just as good, if not a little bit better than last year. They can get the bullpen. They've got more options in the bullpen. They got deeper depth there for more arms, fresher arms, guys coming off of injury. Close those games out, and just even if the offense maintains, but you would hope that they in some of those positions take another at least a half a step forward. It ends up being a better team this year than it has been the last couple of years, and that's moving in the right direction.
Well, you know that, DJ Stewart and Matt Gorski are each going to have like 20 home runs, 30 home runs this season. So we're all good.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say